Hi, everyone. I'm Jane from Illumini Body, and I want to welcome you to our hip stretch and release series. This is a series of videos with various different exercises to help you release, open, stretch the different muscle groups in your hips. We're doing a variety of them because not every exercise works for every body. We're all different. And that's a good thing. And that's why we have a lot in our toolbox. So the first thing we're going to focus on in this week's video is our psoas and our hip flexors. The psoas is a hip flexor. It's sort of the granddaddy of hip flexors. It's a really big muscle that is deep in the body. It's deeper than all the other hip flexors. And one of the reasons it's special is because not only does it cross the hip joint to flex the hips, like the other hip flexors, it attaches actually to your spine. So it attaches on the inside of your spine, the front of your spine, up at the top of the lumbar and the bottom of the rib cage, the thoracic spine, and goes down to the inner part of the top of your thigh bone. So not only does it flex your hip, it also flexes your spine. And for that reason, tight psoas can lead to all number of things like a tight low back, pain in your hips, tightness in your hips, lots of general things in this whole area because it crosses that whole area. So the first exercise I'm going to show you this week is just a big old stretch for that psoas. And we're going to need a yoga block. This is actually a variation of an exercise I had on my blog last year, but it's a little more intense. And again, not for everybody. So if you have a really, really tight low back, you may not want to do this, or you could try it. I'll go through some modifications for you, but it might be a bit intense. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, take this yoga block. We're going to lie on our backs. Okay, so I'm going to have the yoga block by my side so I can grab it pretty easily. And the first thing I'm going to do is just tuck my pelvis up. So you can see I'm kind of rounding my low back into the mat or into the floor. And then I'm going to let it go. And then we're going to tuck it up, kind of like we're doing curling our pelvis up, right? So we're going to tuck it up again. We're going to continue that action and come up into a bridge. We're continuing that feeling of curling the pelvis up. So we're getting a lot of opening in the front of our hips already, right? So I'm going to try to come up into a pretty high bridge here. I don't want my legs to splay out, but I'm already thinking about this curling of my pelvis and lengthening of the spine. And I'm going to try to get my hips as high as I can. I'm going to grab my block. I've got it on kind of the medium height, and I'm going to slip it under my sacrum and my pelvis. So this is actually pretty high. If this feels too crunchy on your low back, you can bring it down, which might be easier on your back. I'm going to keep it up. And then from here, I'm going to let my pelvis rest on the block. So one of the things I want to do, if you can see here, is really allow this low part of my back, this lumbar spine part, to relax. So I'm just gonna, you can kind of see that I'm really letting it go and release down. That means these front ribs are also gonna have to release in. So the more we're arched in the back, the shorter our psoas is, right? So the more we can release here, the longer and more open the psoas becomes. Okay, so I'm going to keep my low back released, and I'm going to bring one leg into tabletop. I'm going to hold it there. As I do that, I'm just going to reestablish that release. I want to keep that the whole time we're going through this exercise. I'm going to hold that leg, and then I'm going to bring my other leg into tabletop, and I'm going to hug them into my chest. So they're pretty close to me, and you can just hold the block there if it feels unstable. So just check in with your low back here, making sure it still feels released. Okay. Then from here, I'm going to keep one leg hugged into me and toward my chest, my left leg. And then I'm going to straighten my right leg out. As I do this, I really want to make sure that this low back stays released. Good. So again, this might be too intense. Feel free not to straighten the leg the whole way or the knee the whole way. Straighten it as much as you feel like you can. And then we're going to bring it down. And you may be able to come all the way down to the floor or not, but don't come any further than this low back stays released. And you're going to probably feel a pretty big stretch throughout the front of your hip here. I'm going to continue to breathe, and I'm going to use my exhale to really let my low back release. Good. And I'm just going to stay here for a few breaths and just feel that release. Again, if this feels like it's too extreme, feel free to keep the knee bent, but always focusing on this release in the low back. Right? Okay, then I'm going to slide my foot in, bend my knee back up, hug the other knee in, keep my low back released, and then reach the other leg out and bring it down. This side is tighter than the other, so I'm just kind of going to let it hover as I find that release in my low back. The more I find that release, I can just get a little further with my leg. Again, this is pretty extreme, so if any of this feels tight, especially in the back, go as far as it feels okay. We're just going to hold here and breathe. And then we're going to bend that knee and bring it back up. From here, I'm going to bring one foot at a time down to the mat. I'm going to scoop my tailbone and come back into that bridge. Slide the block away. And then as I come down, I'm going to try to come down with that same feeling of release in the rib cage and the low back, keeping my pelvis really curled under. We don't want to just plop down. We want to maintain that length in the low back as we come down, so we're not going from a stretch to a shortening position. Good. Once my tailbone's all the way down, I'm going to come into just a wide pelvis. I have a little space under my low back, just my neutral curve there. And then I'm going to hug both knees into my chest and rock from side to side. Good. And then you can bring your feet down. And that is our first hip flexor psoas stretch. I hope it works for you. Again, please don't do anything extreme or use the modifications we talked about. I hope it makes your hips feel better, and look out for our next one. Thanks, everybody.